Hey guys, tonight we unravel one of the most bewildering bedtime stories ever whispered through marble columns and echoing temples. The time the almighty Zeus, king of the gods, turned himself into a swan for absolutely no reason and made a whole mess of ancient Greece in the process. You're floating now through the starlit velvet of Mount Olympus, where clouds taste like whipped cream but smell vaguely of singed olive wood. The gods are restless tonight. You feel it. A strange static hum in the air, like a lightning storm holding its breath. Somewhere in the divine conference room, Zeus is pacing, again. He's shirtless, obviously, muscles chiseled by centuries of petty grudges and thunderbolt practice. He's bored, which is how most of these myths begin. And tonight, boredom blooms into inspiration, of the most feathered variety. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hover beside Zeus now, as he stares into a divine reflecting pool, which doubles as a mythic search engine. He's not looking up military campaigns or the moral decay of Sparta. He's zooming in on a mortal woman named Leda, Queen of Sparta. Married, yes, but the rules are more like suggestions when you're Zeus. Historians still argue whether this moment marks a symbolic tale of divine intervention or just a wildly uncomfortable metaphor for royal lineage. But here's what we do know. Zeus doesn't just zap himself down to earth. No, he transforms into a swan, not a lion, not a thundercloud, a swan. Graceful, yes, but also the angriest bird at any city park. And he doesn't just fly down like some majestic, feathery Romeo. He crashes into Leda's life the way you crash into a coffee table at 2 a.m., dramatically and with a lot of unnecessary honking. You swoop beside him now, a gentle tailwind of divine ridiculousness trailing behind. His feathers shimmer, pure white. His beak, confusingly smug. You try not to make eye contact. You can't tell if he's proud of this plan or already regretting it. Now let's pause here and zoom out just a bit. Mainstream history teaches us that swans were sacred in ancient times. They're linked to beauty, music, and prophecy. Apollo even rolls with a flock of them. So maybe Zeus thought he was being poetic. Or maybe he lost a bet with Poseidon. You'll never know. Zeus, now fully committed to his bird bit, glides toward Leda, who's relaxing under a willow tree near the Eurotas River, minding her business like any respectable mythological queen. The river murmurs beside her, cicadas tuning up in the reeds. It should be peaceful. It was peaceful. Until she notices a swan dive-bombing from the heavens like a feathery missile. And this is no ordinary swan. It's Zeus, which is probably something she could have figured out had she been given more time or a helpful brochure. But no, this is Greek myth, where timelines are optional and consent forms don't exist. You perch silently in a fig tree, watching the most baffling meet-cute in history unfold. Zeus the swan plays injured, flapping pathetically in the grass. Leda, kind-hearted and not yet suspicious of airborne gods, picks him up. This is where things get murky. Some versions claim he merely cuddles up to her for warmth, others suggest lightning bolts may have been involved, and some just go full ancient fan fiction and fade to black. The next day, Leda lays eggs, because of course she does. One doesn't encounter Zeus in bird form and not lay eggs afterward. The math may not math, but Greek myth never promised you logic. Interestingly, ancient lore claims the Spartan royal line descends from this moment. A convenient way to explain their nobility, yes, but also a bit of a stretch. You start to wonder whether some bored poet just invented this whole thing while trying to impress someone at a symposium. Meanwhile, on Olympus, Zeus is back in god form, brushing off feathers and pretending nothing happened. Hera, his long-suffering wife, is probably glaring at him from across a golden breakfast table, wondering how many bird transformations she's supposed to tolerate before flipping Olympus upside down. You notice Hermes smirking in the background. Apollo is playing a tragic tune on his lyre. Even Dionysus pauses mid-party to raise an eyebrow. And you, dear listener, begin to realize this wasn't about romance or symbolism. This was peak Zeus. Petty, chaotic, the kind of cosmic nonsense that makes you want to close your history book and whisper, "Seriously?" But don't drift off just yet. There's more to this eggy saga. Leda is, to put it mildly, having a complicated Tuesday. You drift quietly beside her now, through a warm haze of olive groves and sun-dappled meadows, where the scent of time clings lazily to the air. The moment should be tranquil, except it isn't, because Leda is staring at a pair of very large, very shiny eggs that were not part of her meal plan yesterday. She pokes one with a stick. It wobbles. Now, you might assume this is some kind of symbolic dream sequence, but nope. This is real, at least according to the story. The Queen of Sparta lays 2 eggs, and inside those eggs, 4 children. Yes, 4. Ancient math is just built different. The first egg cracks open to reveal Helen and Clytemnestra. The second hatches Castor and Pollux, those handsome twins you may know from constellations and vague zodiac references. Some stories insist Zeus is the father of all 4. Others claim only 2 are divine, while the others are biologically her husbands. Historians still argue whether this is an allegory for duality or just a chaotic parentage cover-up. And there's Tyndareus, Leda's mortal husband, wandering in with a cup of wine, trying very hard not to notice the giant eggs cooling on the palace tiles like a bizarre Easter morning. You imagine his eyebrows lifting just slightly before he says something like, "Ah, more gifts from the gods, I suppose." What's wild is that no one really panics. This is Sparta, after all. They've seen weirder. As for the kids, they grow up quickly and inconveniently beautiful. Helen especially. Her face will someday launch 1,000 ships, but for now she just drools adorably on royal linens. Meanwhile, Clytemnestra is already side-eyeing the patriarchy, and the boys are trying to fist-fight over who gets to be the cool twin. You're lounging in the palace courtyard now, toes dipped in a ceremonial fountain, watching these demi-deities toddle around like sparkly chaos grenades. And through it all, Leda does what every mythological mother does. She sighs dramatically and pretends this is fine. Now here's where things take a weird academic turn. Some ancient scholars believed this entire myth was meant to explain celestial phenomena. They pointed to the Swan constellation, Cygnus, as a heavenly imprint of Zeus's feathery antics. Others say this was a coded story about seasonal fertility or royal succession. But deep down, you know it was probably just some drunk bard at a party trying to out-weird another bard. Oh, your goddess rides a chariot pulled by cats? Cool, cool. Mine lays divine eggs after a bird god encounter. Top that. The problem with these stories is they don't stop where you'd expect. You'd think Leda's chapter would end with a neat moral or a tragic sigh, but Greek myths don't wrap up. They spiral. Helen becomes the most desired woman in the ancient world, with suitors lining up from every corner of the Mediterranean like she's the world's first influencer. Tyndareus, trying to avoid an international incident, makes all of them swear an oath to protect whichever husband she eventually chooses. Spoiler, it's Menelaus, king of Sparta. Another spoiler, it doesn't go well. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, Helen is just a stunningly shiny toddler, unaware that her future involves war, betrayal, and more poetic metaphors than a freshman literature class. Let's also not forget the twins, Castor and Pollux, one mortal, one divine, depending on which version you believe. They're inseparable. They become legendary horsemen, boxers, and general mythological overachievers. When one of them eventually dies, the other is so heartbroken he begs Zeus to split his immortality so they can share eternity, which Zeus actually agrees to do. It's one of the few tender moments in the entire mythological landscape, which, Considering this is the same Zeus who turned into a swan for vaguely decorative reasons is kind of touching. Back in the palace, Leda sits in the shade, nursing a headache made of feathers, divine paternity debates, and the looming realization that her children are going to break the world someday. You float beside her, sipping imaginary wine and wondering if any of this made more sense in the original ancient Greek. Outside, a servant gossips to another. "Did you hear? The queen laid eggs last week. Yep, swear on Apollo. Twins in both, probably a blessing." And just like that, the myth spreads. It reaches Corinth in whispers, Argos in riddles, Athens in loud, half-accurate songs, and somewhere far off, on Olympus, Zeus is reclining on a cloud, probably pretending he had nothing to do with it. Again. Now let's tuck in one last quirky note for this section. Did you know some early renditions of the myth describe the swan as not Zeus himself, but a decoy? That's right. In that version, Zeus seduces Leda while pretending to flee from an eagle, using the swan as his disguise or distraction. Like some divine rom-com with bird cosplay, you can't make this up. Except the Greeks absolutely did. Your mind drifts with the scent of cedar and myrrh. You begin to forget where the story ends and the absurdity begins. But there's still more to come, because these eggs didn't just hatch babies. They hatched consequences. So now you're gliding above a bronze-tinted battlefield. Quiet for the moment, except for the creak of oiled leather and the soft clink of shields. This is where the legacy of that weird Swan episode really crashes into history. Because one of those children, sweet, shiny Helen, grew up and accidentally helped trigger the most overblown breakup revenge tour in recorded mythology, the Trojan War. But you're not here for the action tonight. No clang of swords or Homeric speeches. Just the gentle drift of myth unraveling itself like a badly knitted scarf. Let's back up a bit. You float back over the calm Aegean Sea, waves flickering like liquid silver. Helen, now older, married to Menelaus, is queen of Sparta. Beautiful in that exhausting way that makes poets weep and nations forget common sense. And somewhere across the sea, there's Paris, a prince of Troy, part-time shepherd, full-time chaos magnet, being told by some goddesses to pick which of them is the fairest. As you may recall, he chooses Aphrodite, who bribes him with a prize, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. So he kidnaps her, or she elopes, or she's spirited away by divine will. No one agrees. Historians still argue whether Helen went willingly, whether she was enchanted, or whether the whole war was just an excuse for Greece to flex its muscles and loot a rival city. Either way, Sparta isn't thrilled. Menelaus calls in that earlier protect Helen no matter what oath, and just like that, the suitors become soldiers. Ships are built, swords are sharpened, the Trojan War sets sail, all because a swan laid an egg, and that's where the myth reaches its most absurd crescendo. You think back to Leda, tired and confused under her tree, and realize this entire war, 10 years, thousands dead, epic poems carved into cultural memory, sprouted from her accidental god-bird rendezvous. Helen becomes legend. Castor and Pollux earn stars in the sky as the Gemini constellation. Clytemnestra eventually murders her husband with an axe in a bathtub. Let's file that under extreme sibling contrast. And you're just here trying to sleep. Some scholars suggest the entire Leda myth was a metaphor for shifting dynastic powers, especially in the Peloponnesian region. Others think it's a retroactive justification for why certain lineages were considered divine. And then there's the unbothered crowd of classicists who simply shrug and say, it's Greek myth. What did you expect? Still, this particular story continues to ripple through culture. It inspired Michelangelo. Yeats wrote poems about it. Even modern artists can't resist that strange, unsettling image, a woman and a swan wrapped in impossible symbolism and feathers. You descend now into a soft, golden room of scrolls and candlelight. Ancient scholars mumble around you, ink-stained and sleep-deprived, debating if the story was meant to scandalize, spiritualize, or just sell amphorae. One waves a parchment, shouting about Orphic eggs and divine birth cycles. Another insists it was originally about the moon. And maybe they're all right, or none of them are. It's myth, after all, fluid, layered, and utterly illogical. There's a tenderness hidden somewhere in the chaos. Maybe it's in the image of Pollux giving up part of his immortality. Maybe it's Helen's mysterious gaze on the city walls of Troy. Or maybe, just maybe, it's in Leda, cradling an egg with a confused frown and hoping no one else lays anything weird that week. Outside, swans float on moonlit ponds, unaware of the role they've played in shaping Western literature. You watch them for a moment. They seem peaceful now, less dramatic. No thunder in the air, no meddling gods overhead. And you? You start to drift. The feathers soften, the questions fade. And as your mind slides into sleep, you remember, not everything has to make sense. Sometimes it just has to sound ancient, and vaguely majestic, and mildly unhinged. The stars stretch above you now, long and slow and unflickering, like tiny lanterns gently rocking in the night wind. The stories they tell grow fainter with every breath you take. Fewer swords, less thunder, no more eggs, we promise. Your body melts a little deeper into the bed. The air is still. You let your hands rest quietly, the warmth of the blanket curling gently around your fingers like the ripples of a calm sea. Somewhere, a temple door creaks shut. A quill is set down on a table, and even Zeus, probably shirtless again, is finally quiet, maybe staring at his reflection in a wine-dark sky and wondering if he really needed to become a swan that day. He didn't. You feel the weight of ancient marble walls drifting away, replaced with soft shadows and cool breezes. There's no judgment here, just a quiet reminder that even the gods made questionable choices, and the universe didn't fall apart. Not completely. You let that thought carry you. Light as feathers, still as a myth long forgotten. If your mind wanders now, let it wander gently. Let it paddle along strange old rivers with silver fish and sleepy reeds. Let it visit a quiet palace with no war, no confusion, just the sound of water and the hush of a world gone still. You're safe now. The story is done. And everything ridiculous that came before can rest quietly, just like you. Sleep well, little historian. Sweet dreams.